Black Boy sacrificed his meal for an old couple's. Next day, a millionaire knocked on his door. In the heart of winter, inside a grand hotel's glowing restaurant, a young black boy quietly pushes his own plate toward a shivering old couple who hadn't eaten in days. He thought it was just a small kindness, but the next morning, a mysterious millionaire appeared at his door, ready to change his life forever. The night outside was unforgiving, the kind of winter that bites deep into the bones and does not let go. Snow fell in sheets, thick and relentless, painting the city in a cruel, frozen silence. The streets groaned under its weight, and even the strongest of men bent against the wind, clutching their coats tighter, desperate for warmth. But behind the tall glass windows of the Grand Imperial Hotel, golden light poured into the night like a beacon, and within those walls, heat and life bloomed like spring had never ended. Crystal chandeliers shone, fires roared in marble hearths, and tables overflowed with meals that seemed fit for kings. It was a place of indulgence, a palace of warmth amidst a world drowning in ice. And there, seated alone at a small corner table, was a boy no older than 13. His coat was worn, the fabric frayed from too many winters past, and his shoes carried the tired look of journeys far too heavy for feet so young. His skin glowed softly in the firelight, the dark hue of his face carrying both the weight of hardship and the innocence of a child. His eyes, deep, wide, and watchful, followed every movement in the dining hall. He was not used to such opulence, not used to chandeliers or grand staircases that spiraled toward painted ceilings. His presence here was a rarity, perhaps even an accident of fate. Before him lay a steaming plate of food, soup thick with meat and vegetables, bread baked golden, and a slice of pie that oozed warmth. To him, it was a feast, a treasure he had dreamed of more times than he could count. His stomach growled, yet his hands did not move to the spoon. Because across the room, another scene was unfolding, and it pierced his heart with an ache sharper than his hunger. Near the farthest corner of the restaurant, almost hidden from view, an old couple sat huddled together. Their coats were thin, their faces weathered by time, and their trembling hands clutched empty teacups as though they held the last remnants of warmth. The man's face was hollow, his cheeks sunken, but his arms still rested gently around the woman beside him. She leaned into him for strength, though her body shook as if the cold outside had followed her in. Their eyes were cast downward, ashamed, as waiters in tailored uniforms moved swiftly past, their trays stacked with food, but their gazes blind to suffering. In a world of plenty, they were invisible. The boy's eyes lingered on them, and in that moment, the weight of his own hunger collided with the sight of theirs. He knew the bite of emptiness, the endless nights where sleep came easier than food. He knew what it meant to carry hunger like a shadow, following always, pressing in with every step. And though he had nothing, though this one meal was all he had been given, his heart stirred with something greater than want. A whisper deep inside him said, "They need this more than you." The decision was silent but swift. He lifted the plate from his table, his small hands trembling as though the meal weighed heavier than stone. Each step toward the couple felt like a journey of miles, the eyes of strangers pricking at his back though none truly noticed him. When he reached them, he set the plate down gently before the old woman. Her eyes lifted, startled, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. Her lips parted, but no words came. The man's hands trembled as he touched the edge of the plate, as though unsure if it was truly meant for him. And the boy, he did not linger, he did not wait for thanks. He turned quietly, and with the faintest of smiles, walked back to his empty table. The old couple ate slowly, reverently, like every bite was both a blessing and a burden. Tears glistened in their eyes, but they did not fall, because in that moment they felt seen, remembered, human again. And the boy sat with his hands folded, his own hunger gnawing at him like wolves in the snow. Yet his heart was strangely full, warmed not by food but by the act of giving. The night carried on, the wealthy diners laughed, the fires crackled, and the snow continued to fall outside the tall windows. The boy left the hotel with nothing in his stomach, but something heavy in his spirit, something he did not yet understand. He returned home to his small, dimly lit apartment, its walls thin against the winter wind, its corners filled with silence. Alone, He curled under the worn blanket on his bed, the hunger sharp but the memory of the old couple's gratitude sharper still. Sleep came slowly, dragging him into dreams of warmth, of faces that glowed with relief, of kindness that burned brighter than chandeliers. And when the morning light broke through the frost-covered glass, his life was no longer the same. For as he rubbed the sleep from his eyes and pulled himself from his small bed, a sound echoed through the stillness. 3 deliberate knocks on his door. Each knock was firm, steady, like the rhythm of fate itself. His heart pounded in his chest as he froze, listening. No one ever came to this door. No one ever sought him out. Yet the knocking continued, echoing through the thin walls of his world. He stepped closer, his bare feet pressing against the cold floor, his breath quickening. Behind that door stood something unknown, something waiting. He could not yet see it, but he could feel it, the presence of a storm about to break, the sense that his small act of kindness had not gone unnoticed. And when his hand reached for the handle, trembling with both fear and hope, the chapter of his life that began with hunger was about to be rewritten by something far greater. The door creaked open. The door opened slowly, its hinges groaning like an old man's whisper. A rush of icy air slipped inside, carrying the sharp sting of morning frost. The boy's eyes blinked against the brightness of the snow that glittered outside, but what he saw standing before him made his breath catch in his throat. A man loomed in the doorway, tall and commanding, his presence filling the narrow hallway like a force of nature. His coat was tailored, the fabric rich, heavy, and lined with fur that spoke of wealth far beyond anything the boy had ever known. Snowflakes clung to the man's shoulders, melting into the fabric as though even the storm itself bowed before him. His face was carved with lines of age, but not weakness, lines that told of battles fought, empires built, fortunes won. His eyes, sharp and searching, fixed on the boy with an intensity that made the small apartment shrink even smaller. The boy's hand remained frozen on the door handle, his heart drumming against his ribs. He did not speak. He could not. For all the world he had known had been silent rooms and lonely meals, but the man before him seemed like someone who carried the weight of entire worlds on his shoulders. The stranger did not step inside. Instead, he studied the boy as though measuring the worth of his very soul. In his gaze, there was no mockery, no dismissal, no impatience. Only something piercing, something that seemed to know. The silence between them stretched, heavy and unbreakable, until finally the man's eyes softened, and he inclined his head ever so slightly, as if offering respect where none was expected. The boy did not yet know it, but this was no ordinary visitor. This was a man whose wealth could buy not just meals but destinies. This was a man who had built towers that scraped the sky, who had dined with kings and spoken with presidents. This was a man who had seen hunger, too, in his own forgotten childhood, and carried the scars of it into his fortune. He had come not by accident, not by chance, but because the boy's sacrifice had reached him like a whisper carried on the winter wind. The night before, while the boy had slipped away unnoticed, others had not. Eyes had watched in the restaurant. Whispers had followed, and one of those whispers had landed in the ear of a man who had been waiting for such a story to find him. He had been waiting for proof that kindness still lived in the world, that sacrifice still breathed, that humanity had not frozen beneath the snow. And so he had come to this door, not as a stranger, but as destiny clothed in fur and frost. The boy stepped back, uncertain, his tiny frame dwarfed by the doorway and the man who filled it. The apartment behind him was bare, its furniture sparse, its air heavy with the scent of struggle. The man's eyes traveled across the room, absorbing the reality of where this child lived, what little he had, and yet what much he had given away. In that moment, the silence spoke louder than words ever could. Then, without warning, the man reached into his coat. The boy flinched slightly, his breath catching, but the hand that emerged did not hold threat. Instead, it held an envelope, thick, weighty, sealed with care. The man extended it forward, his expression unreadable, his gaze unshaken. The boy's small hands trembled as he reached for it, the paper cool against his skin, heavier than it should have been. He looked at it, confused, uncertain. His stomach still twisted with hunger from the night before. But this was not food. It was something else, something unknown. He glanced up, his wide eyes searching the man's face for answers. The man gave none. He only turned slightly, as though preparing to leave, his voice still unspoken. But his silence was not cold. It was deliberate. It carried the weight of choice, as if he were saying without words, "Open it, and you will see." The boy's fingers tugged at the seal. Slowly, carefully, he unfolded the contents within. What he saw made his breath stop. It was not a single bill. It was not even 10. It was a stack of money, crisp, new, far beyond anything he had ever touched in his life. His vision blurred with disbelief, his mind racing to grasp the impossible. Each note seemed to shimmer in the pale winter light, symbols of a future he had never dared to imagine. Tears stung his eyes, though he fought to keep them from falling. The hunger, the loneliness, the cold, all of it seemed to crash against him at once, colliding with the shocking reality of what lay in his hands. This was not just generosity. This was transformation. The man's voice finally came, low and steady, a sound like thunder muted by distance. Though the words themselves were few, they carried a weight that carved themselves deep into the boy's memory. They spoke not of charity, but of recognition, of honor for the sacrifice the boy had made when no one else was watching. And then, as quickly as he had come, the man stepped back into the snow, his footsteps crunching softly until they disappeared into the winter storm. The boy stood frozen in the doorway, the envelope clutched against his chest, his breath ragged, his body trembling not from cold, but from something far greater. He closed the door slowly, almost afraid that if he turned away the vision would vanish, and he would wake to find it all a dream. But it was real. The weight in his hands was real. The possibility blooming in his heart was real. And though the walls around him were still bare, and the night still promised hunger, a seed had been planted in his life, one that would grow roots deeper than winter could freeze. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the money, the silence of the room broken only by the beating of his heart. He thought of the old couple in the hotel, their trembling hands, their tearful eyes. He thought of the plate he had given away, the warmth of their gratitude. He realized then that sometimes the smallest sacrifices echoed loudest in the halls of destiny. And yet, even as his heart swelled, questions gnawed at him. Who was the man? Why had he come? Why him? Out of all the children in the world. And what was expected now? The boy did not know that this knock on his door was not an ending, but a beginning. That this envelope was not simply a gift, but an invitation. An opening to a world larger than the walls of his apartment, larger than the hunger of his stomach, larger even than the kindness of a single meal. The winter outside roared, the snow piled higher, the city buried deeper. But inside that small room, something unstoppable had begun. And the boy, though he did not yet see it, was standing on the threshold of a future that would test the very limits of his courage, his faith, and his heart. The world had knocked on his door. Now it was waiting to see if he would step forward. The envelope still lay on the boy's lap, its edges worn now from the trembling of his hands. He had not moved for what felt like hours, his wide eyes fixed on the stack of bills, as though it might vanish if he blinked too long. Outside, the storm continued to rage, snow drumming against the window, the world wrapped in an endless shroud of white. Yet inside that small, dim apartment, another storm swirled, one of disbelief, of gratitude, of fear, and of possibility. He did not sleep that night. Hunger gnawed at him still, but it was no longer the sharpest pain in his body. What gnawed at him now was the weight of choice. Money could fill his stomach. Money could warm his nights. Money could lift him from the shadows where he had lived his entire young life. Yet beneath all that glittered another question, heavier than any bill in that envelope. Why him? Morning came slowly, the first pale light pushing against the frosted glass, spilling thin gold across the floorboards. He rose, clutching the envelope against his chest, as though it were both shield and burden. The streets outside were quieter than the night before, but the city still shivered under winter's grip. And yet, the boy's steps carried him not toward the market or the store, but back to the hotel, the place where it had all begun, the place where hunger had met sacrifice, and sacrifice had been seen. The Grand Imperial Hotel stood tall against the snow, its windows glowing, its doors open wide to a world of luxury. The boy entered quietly, the warmth wrapping around him like an embrace he had long forgotten. The chandeliers still blazed overhead, The tables still overflowed, but his eyes searched only one corner, the place where the old couple had sat. And there they were, fragile, hunched, but alive. They sat closer than before, hands entwined as though afraid the world might pull them apart. Their faces bore the marks of many winters, but their eyes, those eyes carried something the boy recognized, the memory of a kindness that had fed them more than food ever could. He approached them, slowly, carefully, until their gaze lifted to meet his. Recognition flared instantly, and their weathered faces softened. The boy did not speak, for words were not his gift. Instead, he set the envelope upon their table. Their hands trembled as they touched it, their lips parting in disbelief as they saw the impossible stacked within. Tears broke free, sliding down their wrinkled cheeks, and though no sound came, their gratitude filled the air heavier than any thunder. For the boy understood something in that moment. What he had received was never meant for him alone. Blessings, when hoarded, turn heavy. When shared, they take flight. The old couple had given him nothing the night before but their silent thanks. Yet that was enough to ignite a chain of grace that returned to him tenfold. Now, it was his turn to keep the chain unbroken. The hotel staff noticed, their eyes widening as they watched the boy give away what most grown men would have clung to desperately. Murmurs rippled across the dining hall. Whispers carried on astonished lips. And among those whispers, unknown to the boy, word traveled once more. It found its way to the man in the fur-lined coat, the millionaire whose knock had changed the boy's life. That evening, as the snow began to ease and the streets softened beneath the pale light of gas lamps, the boy returned home. His apartment was still bare, his cupboards still thin, yet his spirit felt lighter than ever. He curled beneath his blanket, not with the hunger of despair, but with the warmth of purpose. For though his stomach was empty, his heart overflowed. But fate was not finished. A week later, the millionaire returned. His knock thundered once again through the narrow hallway. But this time when the boy opened the door, the man's eyes carried not just recognition, but something deeper, respect. For he had heard what the boy had done with the money, how he had passed forward what could have freed him. It was an act no one expected, an act that few could fathom, a child with nothing choosing still to give. The man stepped inside at last, his broad frame filling the room, his gaze sweeping across the barren walls and empty shelves. And then he spoke, not with words of pity, but with words of promise. For this boy, he declared silently with his presence, was no longer to be forgotten by the world. What followed was not charity, but opportunity. The man opened doors that had long been locked, introduced the boy to schools where his mind could flourish, placed him in spaces where his kindness was not overlooked but honored. He became a mentor, a guide, a guardian who saw not just the boy's need but his heart, the kind of heart the world itself needed. Years passed, and winter after winter came and went. The boy grew, not just in stature but in spirit. His story spread far beyond the hotel walls, told and retold in whispers that became echoes, and echoes that became legacies. For people saw in him not just a child who gave away a plate of food, but a living truth, that sacrifice, even in silence, can ripple through time and alter destinies. The old couple lived their final days in dignity, warmed not just by meals, but by the memory of a boy who saw them when no one else would. The millionaire, too, found in that boy a mirror of the child he had once been, and through guiding him, found a redemption money alone could never buy. And the boy? He never forgot the night of hunger, the trembling hands, the knock on his door. He carried those moments within him always, not as wounds, but as fuel. And in every act of kindness he gave, in every life he touched, he passed forward the gift that had once passed to him. For in the end, the greatest wealth was not the bills in the envelope, nor the fortune of the man who gave them. The greatest wealth was the boy's unshaken belief that even the smallest act of compassion could set the world ablaze. And so, in the heart of winter, from a glowing hotel to a humble apartment, a story was written that no snowstorm could ever bury. A story of hunger, of sacrifice, of reward, and of a legacy that outlived them all.